Welcome everyone. Well, the time is now 5:30. So we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Andy Emerson, and I am the event coordinator with WCAG, and I oversee the Accessibility Twin Cities meetup. This evening, we will be joined by Bill Tyler of Optum, who will be presenting on demystifying and taming WCAG 2.1. Thank you everyone for joining us this evening as we had moved this meetup from June 8th to this evening. We want to first thank our sponsors. That includes United Health Group and WCAG. Without their assistance, it would be very challenging or impossible for us to host such great content and provide such great information. And just a couple opening announcements. I don't know if we have, Lynn, are you on yet?
I don't see her.
I don't see her either. So I know she wanted to provide these announcements. I think we can, maybe we follow up at the end and just touch on these few items. In the meantime, then, I think we can go ahead and just move on to the presentation, and we'll address these welcome as a break or towards the end. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing screen, and Bill, you can take it away.
Okay. So I get myself so I'm sharing a screen, not looking at options for sharing a screen. So one moment here. Get stuff out of the way. Okay, I think I'm ready. Hello, everybody. I hope you can hear me. It's like, yes, my name is Bill Tyler. This is Demystifying and Taming the Complexities of WCAG 2.1. If you want this URL on the bottom, this bit.ly URL, bit.ly/3h, capital G, lowercase o, capital U, capital B, capital G, will take you to SlideShare, where I put a copy of this deck so you can follow along or have the notes so that you can, don't need to take notes during the session. That's available now, and I'm going to kind of use a hashtag bespoke checklist, WCAG checklist that you see also. So assuming we are good, so I will have time at the end of the presentation. Ah, there's Lynn. Should we have Lynn speak, because we did, she's just in time because we did skip over that, because otherwise I can begin.
I do apologize for being late, being held up. Welcome everybody to Accessibility Twin Cities June version. Thank you for transitioning with us to a later date, and thanks especially to Bill for accommodating that. We had, obviously here in Minneapolis, it's been a really challenging few weeks, and so we've had to do a lot of shifting. So I apologize, it's been a busy day. Just wanted to do a few announcements. First of all, just want to thank Optum Health for sharing Bill with us, and we always try to get Bill for at least one thing every year, and we try not to ask too many times, but he always has such great information, so we're really excited about this. Just wanted to also check in with the membership, because we know that we've been virtual for a little over a year now. We're really pleased that we made that decision a year ago in January, because it's obviously paying off now. But just to let the membership keep in mind that if you need anything, we have Andy Emerson as our event coordinator, and Andy is available through the meetup website. If you have any questions, if something isn't going well, please get back to Andy about that, because your membership is important. We want to make sure that you take advantage of that. Andy also keeps all the past sessions stored and recorded on the site for you. Also wanted to let you know that we had a wonderful public event for Global Accessibility Awareness Day, Accessibility in the Age of COVID. And it was a 90-minute panel that spanned everything from how do we reach customers, who live with disabilities to how do we employ people who live with disabilities in the age of COVID. That's available on WCAG's YouTube channel, and I'm going to ask Andy to share that link out with the membership so that he can get that information out to you as well. And then just quick update is that we are going to be doing something special in Accessibility Twin Cities Meetup for National Disability Employment Awareness Month. And our teams at WCAG will be doing events all month in October for that. That should be coming up. Just the last bit of business I want to take care of is that we've got some really great events coming up in this meetup. We have July 27th, the process of accessibility. And we did one of these last November where Bill was actually on that one, as were our colleagues from General Mills. This time we've asked Matthew Lucan, who is a UX designer and director working on accessibility for US Bank. He's going to be sharing, and that is July 27th. The one I really wanted to bring up to everybody today is that September 28th, the topic is the right tools for the job using accessibility software. And we really need members who do this to reach out to Andy and let him know that you've got information to share. You don't necessarily have to do the big full-blown presentation like we have Bill doing today, but if you've got some ideas that you want to share, we could put you together on a panel so folks could ask questions, or if you want to just share a few tips, that's fine. It can be pretty casual, but we really want to make sure that we're getting that program together. So let your colleagues know if you're using accessibility tools. That is not our bailiwick at WCAG at all. So we would really appreciate the membership stepping up for that. And then for the final one that we'll be doing in November will be Accessibility Live, how assistive technology really interacts with your website. So we're going to be bringing some of our WCAG testers and accessibility specialists to help with that. Or if you are a member and you use assistive technology, we really would love to have you join in on that. So again, apologize for being late. And I am really excited to hear what Bill has to say. So I will let you take it away, Bill.
Okay, thank you, Lynn. So again, I'm Bill Tyler. This is Demystifying and Taming the Complexities of WCAG 2.1. If you didn't already, there's a slide share deck available at bit.ly at bit.ly / 3 lowercase h, capital G, lowercase o, capital U, capital B, capital G. And you can go there, download it, or follow along, have a copy. So you can focus on this instead of trying to copy down what you hear me saying. All right. So let's start off, and a little bit more about me and the way we do things at Optum is I have a meet the speaker slide, and it's like we start with what is our superpower. And my superpower is that I am experienced methane, which really means that I'm an old fart. I've been doing UX design and development since about 1984, and I've got a degree in computer science because I was a programmer in an earlier life. But I've been doing full-time accessibility since 2013, and with my first exposure and actually doing it at Blue Cross of Minnesota about 18 years ago. And I'm also a W3C invited expert on role-based accessibility, which I presented on several times, including those previous meetups with this group. And they also like to say, when did my accessibility journey truly start? And I said, I think I learned a lot from the challenges of the blind through a friend of mine who was born without eyes when I met him about 20-some years ago. His name was Don Wardlow, and he was the St. Paul Saints color commentator. And, going to lunch with him, going to drinks with him, watching him, having to navigate how to use an ATM, or reading out the menu so he knew what he wanted to eat. Taught me a whole lot about what it was to be blind and what his challenges were, along with the things he shared about what it was like for himself. So that's a little bit more about me. What we need to say is maybe a little more about where I work, and that's what we're doing here in this presentation is what we've been using at the United Health Group Accessibility Center of Excellence. and for doing testing against WCAG or WCAG. This group has been in existence for about 6+ years, and the work that we're doing continues to change and adapt to the circumstances. And as the previews have been saying, what you're going to see has been applied to somewhere on the order of 200+ products that our company has, because United Health Group is huge. We are a Fortune 6 company, yes, with, as I said, a couple of hundred products, and we are international, but the main focus tends to be in the United States. So that's the big picture. More closer to home, let me give a little description of things that apply to this presentation, and especially or specifically on the Accessibility Center of Excellence. Now, a lot of it, when it comes to our growth, can be summed up in this particular slide, which I will describe and have the long description in a moment. But as you can see, starting in November or so of 2013, there was nothing, and then I got to report to someone else making a department. But around the start of 2017, we had finally, over the course of just a couple of years, grown to 11 people. And then we had takeoff. We had to grow dramatically to 31 people, which was a 200% increase and a tripling of our staff, which represents a lot of challenges and did a lot of the things that impacted our checklist and where we learned a lot. That's going to be in this presentation. So kind of describing this in more detail, we are the primary practice for the United Health Group overall, which includes Optum and United Healthcare, or UHC. We started in December 2013 with 2 people. I think I was the first full-time accessibility professional. And we started and grew to about 10 people with mergers and internal changes. Then, after the summer of 2016, we had a big change in our organization where we needed to focus on taking care of all of the products that the company had, which is, again, over 200. And we increased, as I said, 300%. Let's say that's 200% actually, from 200 people, 20 people over 6 months. And after that, we transitioned to what we currently have is more of a consulting and governance model, where we have even a separate digital accessibility program from our UHC group, where we have the Center of Excellence has the consulting parts. We still do annual assessments. And then when it comes to everything under the UHC group, there's a digital accessibility program, or DAP. That's where we have what amount to portfolio managers who oversee the accessibility of groups of products in that area. So overall, under UHG, we have about 45 people total that are in our group, and that's a huge change, as I mentioned, from just 5 years ago when there were only a handful of us. But we are still growing. So that's the group that I work for, and let's talk briefly about WCAG 2.1. I'm going to do that briefly because I'm sure most of you do know it, but for those who may not, let's do the quick summary. WCAG, WCAG 2.1, is the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines from the W3C, and the W3C is the Worldwide Web Consortium that gave us all the web standards, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and, of course, WCAG. WCAG 2.1 is organized under 4 principles, or the POUR principles, because that is a great acronym from what those principles are. POUR, and that's for perceivable, which has 4 guidelines, operable, which has 5 guidelines, understandable with 3 guidelines, and robust with 1 guideline. That's at the higher structure of the form and of WCAG. And in those guidelines, there are 78 success criteria across 3 levels, which are the things that give you a sense of the significance or the importance of those. There are 30 single A criteria, the ones that you very much need to do. There are 20 double A criteria, which together with the single A are the double A conformance that you need to meet. And then there's 28 triple A criteria, which tend to be more optional. They are things that you can achieve and would make for an even better experience for people with disabilities. The target that you see for accessibility related to WCAG is WCAG AA, and starting in 2008 when 2.0 was released, that was 38 criteria, and that's the single and the double A criteria. That still is the official U.S. standard for Section 508 and a lot of other cases and laws around the globe as well as the country. It's also the basis for a lot of legal precedents. It is changing since WCAG 2.1 was released 2 years ago. That has 50 criteria altogether, and it's the standard for things such as the European Union or EU with EN 301549, which is their governmental standard across the EU, and some organizations such as the University of Minnesota locally have made WCAG 2.1 their standard for procurement. It has been our standard internally since January of last year, since we tried to stick close to the cutting edge and with the standards as they evolve. So that's a little bit about WCAG, and WCAG is very powerful. It is the standard everybody uses, but there are some trouble. There's trouble in River City because there are some things about WCAG that don't quite work. And the fact is, WCAG is great for learning and organizing, but one size does not fit all. When you take it off the rack, it isn't ready for you to use. So when you take WCAG out, and that starts with those principles, those POUR, perceivable, operable, understandable, robust. That's great for organizing things. It's great for talking about what you're trying to do with accessibility, but you can't test robust very well. You need something that's a little more closer to the actual product. The next level below that, guidelines. All those guidelines I mentioned under each of the principles, those do elaborate on those principles, but they don't add a lot of detail. You've got a lot more work to do because, as you kind of suggested, the success criteria is where the testable requirements are. That's what matters because those are what you actually have to meet. That's the single A and the double A ones that you need to meet. And that's the basis for conformance. When you're trying to meet WCAG AA conformance, whether it's 2.0 or 2.1 to meet Section 508 or EN 301549, this is what you need to meet. But when you look at those particular success criteria, the text is not really still set up in a way that you can make it actionable. And that they're not really in a checklist that you can test, and there are no checkpoints that you can follow. And there are lots of challenges that come in there, which we'll talk about. Where you find a lot more of the detail is one level beyond that, which people tend not to think about, which is the understanding documents. Because in the understanding documents for each success criterion, it describes the situations that apply, what you need to do. It defines the techniques that will help you to meet that. They will describe the failures that mean that you did not meet that criteria, and a lot more of the intent, how to apply it, examples. So if you're new to WCAG, you should be spending your time in the understanding document like I did many years ago to get there. So with WCAG's difficult off the rack, what did we face? Well, we use what I refer to as bespoke checklists. And give me a moment, I'll describe that, I'll define that. But it's another way of saying we custom tailored WCAG to meet our needs as a big company with its own special situations in the marketplace. Now, what is bespoke? Bespoke is a British adjective. It's British English. It's like spelling color with C-O-L-O-U-R. Bespoke means made for a particular customer or user, like a bespoke suit. And when I think of bespoke, it's like that's what I do think of as bespoke suit. So if I went to get a fine suit made, I'd go to London and Savile Road, and they would take a myriad of measurements across all over my body to make a suit that was impeccably tailored, would fit me correctly in all ways, from the end of the sleeves to my back to the front and the slacks and everything else about it. That's the sort of situation that we face when we are a company as large as ours. It's like trying to go to a big men's store and trying to buy something off the rack. Not a very good fit for a lot of situations. So where we came from on this approach is that before we had that takeoff point, before we tripled in size, we had no budget but lots of time on our hands. And so for the first couple of years, we knew that we were going to need to test all of these products. So we started to do what we could to prepare. When we had no budget, we couldn't buy some of those popular tools that we could find from the accessibility vendors, and decided to make our own checklist. And when it came to the tool to do that checklist, we did it in Excel. That was the tool of choice because Microsoft Office is standard issue in the company. It has some basic database operations so we could adapt it to do different things. And some of those operations included the ability to sort things, so we could find by priority or by WCAG order. We could filter things, so if some did not meet the criteria, then we could filter and show those and focus on them. It also has the ability to import and export data to and from the spreadsheet to other products. Now, that's what we had before takeoff. After takeoff, when we should have everything right, we didn't have what we needed. We had still very little budget. We had no time anymore. And as I mentioned, nothing fit properly. I'll describe that here. I mean, we focused on having to build and adapt on the fly. We grabbed the checklist that we had at the time, started to make it and pull it into making the reports that we needed to meet the needs that our stakeholders were saying, what our business owners, the people who are paying our salaries and paying for all of that growth, had certain things they wanted to see, and we needed to respond to that. And we didn't have, during that ramp up, we had been working maybe 3 products in total, and now we had 200. So there was very little time to implement and deploy new tools. We had to spend that time hiring 20 people. And if you do anything in an interview process, you can tell that if you're trying to find good candidates, and you got to get people together to do the interviews and review things, and then start them up and bring them on board, get them so that they have their computers working and they know how to do things. That takes up a great deal of time. And we had to test all these products and bring people on board. So there was not a lot of time to implement new tools. And we had limited budgets, so if we were trying to find a product that would fit our organization, that would allow us to deal with 20, 30 seats or more in the future, that was going to be another part, which the prices would go crazy. And some of the tools were just incomplete. I mean, you have automated tools, but they don't give you full coverage, so you still have to do manual testing. There were concerns about, okay, what's it going to be like in the future? We're going to have needs to integrate our results into other systems in the company so that we can report and track the accessibility and the measurements that we do on this. And the other part is that when you have 200 products, when you are a company that's international with 250,000 employees, and you've got a staff that, as I said, right now is around 45 people, some of these tools are just not at the scale that you need. You need to have the cost of the licenses per seat go up dramatically. The ability to handle hundreds of products and then organize them, because we have so many levels of management that you have product owners who own maybe a handful of products, and then they report to somebody who has a suite of products, and they merge at a VP who has a different level, and so on and so forth. You need to have something that will scale up to that. And that takes a kind of a tool that has a lot of things built into it already, and those don't typically exist because you're looking at companies that have got much less responsibility, have much more flexibility in what they're doing, and as a result, they can evaluate other tools. Now, there are certain benefits that come from this. Clearly, if we build it to fit our needs, it is tailored to our needs, and it goes and we can adapt to exactly what our business requirements become, whether it's from our leadership in our group, from our clients internally and our stakeholders. And that starts with being able to integrate to our tools and processes. We did get an automated testing tool, and we were able to integrate from that, so we can take that result and import it into our spreadsheet and integrate it. And we could pick from any of the vendors that we might want. And we are working to migrate it so we can export our results and put that into our governance, risk and compliance GRC application, which is the backbone of how risk and compliance are done at the corporate level on all sorts of things. We are in the medical sphere, so HIPAA and privacy and all of those sorts of things are just one area where we have existing governance, risk, and conformance and compliance requirements, and we can now integrate to that because our tool is adaptable. We have the ability to get the data in there, and we can optimize and change to the current circumstances for our program. We continue to evolve, such as going from WCAG 2.0 to 2.1. coming up with our own standards, and planning for the future, because there's WCAG 2.2 in the future as well as 3.0. These are things that we'll need to adapt to. One other area that a company of our size has that is very unusual is that multi-billion-dollar companies do not like risk. And whereas, going and buying software off the shelf from a company that, the many companies out there, DQ, Level Access, Paciolo Group, that's great, except, even a group as big as the W3C is something that a company our size wants to have some influence on, because if it goes in the wrong direction, if they change the way their tools work, that can be a major impact to all of our products and all of our processes, and being able to have control over that is a big benefit for a group like ours. If you're a smaller company, certainly not a concern, but in our situation, the company could buy some of these products, buy these products, or buy the company that produces them if it had to, but it really does not want to take on that risk. Now, before I go further, there are downsides. You may hear me say we did all this stuff, we had the luxury of this time at one point. Yeah, that was good for us, but there are clearly downsides. There's time to build. We had the luxury early on, and we could get some of the things in place before we had to ramp it up in the crazy time that we doubled and tripled in size. We had cost and resources. I mean, building this, not only takes time, you have to get people to be able to put that together, to process WCAG, to get things moving forward, to get that done. Also, once you do this, you need to have people that can support and maintain that tool, because you're not buying it from a vendor who will be doing a maintenance upgrade and doing all these things to keep it updated and current and give you a planned schedule. Now, if this doesn't apply to your organization, you're still going to probably hear some things in this presentation that you can apply, because some of the challenges, some of the benefits we found, and some of the things that we did can be applied to other people's tools, that you can use them in the systems. And so, stick around. There may be something you'll find useful, even if you don't build everything from scratch. So let's talk about, we made the bespoke checklist, and we start with the bespoke checkpoints. As I mentioned, we needed to custom tailor the the success criteria. And that's really a story of 3 versions of the checklist. And it's kind of like the 3 bears. It's like too hard, too soft, just right. Well, we kind of had that situation. And here's where you can get some lessons learned if you do checklists yourself. The first checklist we did was, kind of 1 checkpoint per success criterion. That's a real obvious mapping. You get 30, and with the case of WCAG 2.0, which we were using at the time, that ends up with 38 checkpoints. That wonderful one-to-one relationship makes sure that you've got full coverage for everything WCAG. And if you need to create a report, such as a VPAT, which is a voluntary product accessibility template, which you turn into an ACR, which is an accessibility conformance report, that's what you need. So it's really handy to have that. You've got to have that coverage so that you can say, yes, we are conforming, or we have conformance in most of these areas, but these are where we're still working on, and we're going to have those done by this date or so forth. And early on, we didn't have many projects, so that really seemed acceptable. I mean, when you're just doing a real light review of a site, doing it at the high level, it's like, yep, that failed. Nope, I didn't see any cases where this failed on the site. It works very well. Now, at this stage, you've run into some of the problems with WCAG itself, and it's really a challenge that I found when I was analyzing the success criteria several years ago, which is the variable complexity of them. There are many criteria that are just far more detailed than others, and those of you who know these criteria will understand what I'm going to talk about, where the first criteria in WCAG 111, non-text content, is pretty complex. And you compare that to something that's really simple, like 3.1.1, language of page, which all you have to do on a web page is make sure you've got 12 characters, LANG equals quote, EN close quote, and add a space so it doesn't bump up against the word HTML in the tag. And you've made the page accessible by making sure it identifies what the language the page is in. Is it in English? Is it in Spanish? Compared to non-text content, which says you can have regular images, you can have logos, you can have non-text, you can have players, you can have decorative images. You have all of these special cases. What do you do if you're doing a picture and it's part of a quiz? How you do is going to do that, and how you support that properly compared to what you do when it's a logo or it's a chart represent all these variations, and those should be tested differently than something as simple as, does it have a lang attribute, and is it set correctly for that language? Some of them get very complex, and they span in different areas. 131 info and relationships, that covers a whole wealth of things. It's very oddly organized, but it covers forms, labels, tables, groups, lists, headings, and all sorts of things. And it doesn't have a lot of great guidance on what it is, but all of those are things you need to test. And when you're testing, you may want to do them as separately as opposed to lumping your forms and error handling in with your headings and tables. Also, WCAG as written is really speaking to the accessibility community. The terms it uses are confusing or not commonly used by other roles that you need to communicate to. So when you're talking to a developer, I need that to be accessible. Well, when you talk to stakeholders, for example, they say, sure, it's accessible. I can access it on my iPhone. I can do it on my iPad. That's not the accessibility we're talking about. When we talk about being robust, if we're talking about it being conforming, all of these words are great for defining a very specific standard for people. But those people, that audience, primarily accessibility professionals, when you talk to others, you really want to have things that are organized and speak in a different language. So we started refining it and changing the checklist in our second version. Now, in this 2.0 version, we created one checkpoint for each subcase in each success criterion. Now, as I mentioned before, the understanding documents are a great source of information. They help break up success criteria into smaller chunks. And if you go in the understanding documents, if you look at the details, most of them have situations. So we had documented what those situations were and what the cases, and that building on that standard building block gave us the ability to break up those images in non-text content into some of the things that WCAG said was there. We could also look at subcases in the text itself. Some things are requirements. It must do this, it must do that. Or you have, to meet this criterion, you must have one of these options met. We helped define those so we would be able to test for those. Along the way, we were on projects where we had new standards. We had a product which we tested for one of the 50 states in the country, and we had an external audit be done, and we had to meet what the auditor was saying was going to be necessary for that state, and included testing all 60 pages of that self-service application for sign-in, as well as testing it on 13 BRATs, and we mean by BRAT is a browser AT combination. So it was tested on Firefox, IE, Safari, using JAWS, NVDA, Window Eyes, with Zoom Text, Magic, Dragon, and other programs, and we had a lot of these things started to define our standards around 5 years ago, and we put those things that they said we needed to do about headings, error handling, got baked into our checkpoints that went beyond WCAG. As a result, when we got done, we could have had a checkpoint total going from 38 to 113, but we cut it down to something slightly more manageable with 84, and that's where the checklist was about the time 4 years ago when everything started to take off. And that gave us a lot more finer grain, better focus to our checkpoints and organized them better than we could in WCAG out of the box. But we had new challenges. There was a lot of duplication. There was some overlap. As we hired people, they weren't there when we did these other projects. They weren't familiar with some of these things, and they got confused. Like, well, what is this doing? What does this mean? Because they weren't there when the checkpoints were written, so it was confusing, and it led to extra work. You had to spend your time teaching the testers how to do things, or they needed extra understanding, or they just ended up answering the same point several times because the checkpoints were not, they had a lot of overlap. You had, even in WCAG, cases where you feel that you need to test this 2 or 3 times, and when you're trying to get 200 products tested, you really don't want to do that. You want to get it so it's cleaner and leaner. So we had to look at, we had, as I said, we had creamed, for example, non-text content went from 1 to 11 checkpoints. Info and relationships went to 20 checkpoints. And we had, this duplication. You had, forms is a great example. We are currently working on that in our group, doing a further review. And info and relationships, how labels are related to fields, as well as labels and instructions, you get that sort of a duplication. What am I supposed to test, and do I have to report it more than once? These are the things that we saw in the 2 version, where it's like we had gone from too little to too large, and as I kind of suggested already, in the 3rd version, we got it tailored really to our needs while we were in the midst of doing the testing. We reviewed all the checkpoints, we revised them, rewrote them, and we reduced the count. We went through all 84 checkpoints. We went through, revised, and rewrote them for clarity based on what our team was telling us, because we now had a team, new people that were telling us, hey, I don't follow what's going on here. We went forward and trying to respond to their needs. We merged checkpoints to reduce that duplication and overlap. And as a result, we could remove many checkpoints, and we got them into new versions that kept the things we were testing. If we were testing a best practice in a checkpoint that was going to be merged with another, we made sure we carried it across, because we already had a set of legacy assessments that we might need to compare. We wanted to make sure that we didn't surprise it. What do you mean? I thought this was so important. You told me it was failed. No, it was going to show up. We just had to make sure it was accounted for. And we made sure that there still was at least one checkpoint for each criterion. That way we still could do that VPAT roll-up where we had at least an answer or a response to every success criterion, even if we never had to apply them. And as a result, during that review, which took several months, we reduced the count by 22. That was 26% from 84 to 62. And when it came to checkpoints related to a success criteria, that count of 11 for non-text content actually went down dramatically to 4. Info and relationships dropped by 6 from 20 to 14. And as a result, again, that's how we got from 84 checkpoints down to 62. Now, as I mentioned, we went to WCAG 2.1 as the start of last year. That added 15 new criteria. That added a dozen criteria and 15 checkpoints. So our current count is a kind of bicentennial or July 4th, 1976 checkpoints. But that is, we're still, compared to what you see, somewhere in the middle. We are not doing something that looks more like a VPAT, where there's one criterion, one checkpoint, and not as complex as I've seen from other vendors where they have multiple checkpoints attacking things from all sorts of different areas. So we still use a checklist that's primarily, other than adding WCAG 2.1, the same one we were using a couple of years ago when we got through that 3rd pass and we really retailored all of our checkpoints to meet our needs. But that wasn't enough, because that's the checkpoints. Those are the success criteria. How do you organize this? How do you group those in something meaningful? And that's where you get from bespoke checkpoints and a bespoke checklist to bespoke groupings. You want to custom tailor principles and guidelines to a certain degree to something that actually fits the way you want to do testing. And that speaks to another problem with WCAG, which is the principles and guidelines, as I mentioned before, are for accessibility professionals. But they don't work well for product testing. I mean, the topics, as I said before, they're not necessarily say, oh, yes, we got to get info and relationships working together, and try describing that to a business owner, designer, an author, or the developers. You get obscure terms like time-based media. It's like if you say audio-visual or YouTube videos, say, oh, yeah, I get it what you mean. Oh, in the closed caption, it's like, get it. And adaptable, robust, compatible. These terms that you hear in the guidelines, compatible with what? Robust in what way? Adaptable how? It's like, and not only is it just the vocabulary, it's like, yeah, who are you going to put in charge of making things robust? And, how do I deal with things that people think of as their features? How do I test forms is a good question. How do I test layout, presentation? How do I discuss the semantics of the content so the content author can write it properly? Those are not easily found in WCAG because the core principles and the guidelines are not aligned that way. They're aligned to make sense for how you do accessibility, but not really so good for testing. You also have topics I've already touched on that span success criteria. They span guidelines. They span principles. As I mentioned earlier, Forms. You've got info and relationships, which tells you that you need to be able to get your label associated with the field, but you have and that's under the P principle for perceivable. But Guideline 3.3, which is about handling input assistance, tells you that you need a label and you need to report errors and what you're testing, and they are not under the same principle or guideline, and they are completely separate. And some of them are AA and they're not single A. You get these sorts of challenges. So we created our own custom groups, and we could tailor them for our audiences and their needs. What you can do when you do custom groups is you can get them from being, the guidelines, you can set them to a size that makes sense. For example, we created a group for stakeholders with 8 categories using terms that we expected they could understand. And then for the engineers doing the testing, we would have 10 or more groups that would be in terms that would make sense to them and would allow them to do their job a little more effectively. We can organize them there under the subject. So we have things like about keyboard operation, forms and tables, not general goals or principles that don't align so well. And we could more organize them that they might be better to communicate against the roles. Like, these things are all about presentation. These checkpoints are about content and semantics. These are about how you code things, such as your implementation. We could also make sure that WCAG tries to be very even-handed. All the success criteria, as far as they're concerned, they all have to be met, and they are all pretty much equal. Our products are, fit a certain pattern. There are certain things we do. We are not Netflix. We don't have a lot of videos. We have a lot of forms. And what we could do is we could structure our checkpoints and group them in a way that would fit our needs. We could get the things about error prevention, error handling, keyboard operation, and the things that made sense for our products, and somewhat de-emphasize the things that didn't happen so frequently. Now, custom groupings have some clear benefits. We could have different sets of groups to organize our checkpoints and apply them for testing or for reporting needs. And that allowed us that we could test in groups that would be good for our testers to do, then turn around, take the results, and report them out in charts and graphs and things that would be more meaningful to stakeholders. So they would they might merge some of the testing groups, but they would still be something that would be not too overwhelming. It's like 7 plus or minus 1 categories will be a little more acceptable than giving a whole dozen as it becomes overwhelming for your stakeholders. We could also, because we were using a spreadsheet, we could filter by topic. We could just see all the checkpoints related to tables or to images. That becomes very powerful, especially when you're new and WCAG is like, okay, I know WCAG has things about labels and they are here and they are there. If you can just filter, it's like, show me only the checkpoints that are about tables or about forms, then it simplifies it so you can find them faster. And also, when you can filter like that, you can do what is a great feature is that you can start setting checkpoints in batches. As I mentioned, we don't do a lot of videos, time-based media. We can go in and it's like we see a page, oh, no videos on this page, set all the checkpoints to not applicable. This page has no forms, set all the checkpoints to not applicable. Hey, there are no tables of any kind of it. Set them all to not applicable. That allows and gives you a lot more power and speed that you can automate. So groupings, if you make them to fit what makes sense for your organization and for how you do testing, really can give you some benefit when you're trying to do lots of testing. And when it comes to an example of groupings, this is the groups that we have as of WCAG 2.1. Going in the order I have them here, you've got it with keyboard input, mobile, which is primarily the WCAG 2.1 success criteria checkpoints, navigation, forms, tables, images, presentation, semantics, content, code, and then time-based media. Keep this order in mind because that speaks to one of the next things. We've got our checkpoints and we've got our groupings. How are we actually going to test them? And that gets to another part about WCAG, which is even more subtle, which is the order that you test things. And one of the things we created was bespoke sort orderings. We can custom tailor some numbers on here to put the checkpoints in an order that makes for a more efficient testing and sequencing. Because Another challenge with using WCAG out of the box is it's a jumble. The principles and guidelines, again, great for learning things when you're starting out, but testing with it is really inefficient, because if you go in standard WCAG order from 1.11 forward, you start with non-text content, looking primarily at images. Then you get to guideline 1.2, which is time-based media, which is all about video and audio. Then you jump to info and relationships, where there's programmatic stuff's going on. Then 132, meaningful sequence, and then 133, sensory characteristics. It became really obvious, and a real problem for our testers, including myself, is that you find yourself jumping all around in WCAG order. It's like you're testing images and something else comes up. Or it's like, I'm testing images, but I'm doing videos. We don't have a lot of videos. Like, okay, this seems to be unimportant when I need to get some initial findings back to the team. WCAG order is really challenging because you are bouncing around in all these sorts of things. When you really want to do something like, I am testing forms and I want to do info and relationships and get sure that I have all my labels associated, I have all my field sets oriented, I've got the connections between error messages and things to the field, as well as the parts under guideline 3.3 for input assistance, where it's like, do you have labels? Do you have instructions? Do you have suggestions on how to fix errors? You find yourself testing forms jumping between the start of WCAG order and near the end of it. That's not very efficient. A sort order can help you there. And there are some other things about the criticality of it. If you start in WCAG order, criterion 211, keyboard operation, and 212, keyboard trap. Keyboard operation is the 21st success criteria in WCAG order for 2.0, and that's just with single A and double A. If you've got something where the thing doesn't work with a keyboard, something as critical as that, it's in the middle or towards past the halfway point in your testing before you even get to it. And where it comes to this crazy order, WCAG 2.0 was difficult, but it went single A, double A, triple A, and it was finished. And things would be generally pretty well grouped. 2.1 started, they kept everything in WCAG 2.0 just fine, but when they added it afterwards, topics got scattered across. You may have the same issue covered in different checkpoints under, or success criteria under a guideline, but they're not consecutive. And if you kept to WCAG order, you're doing one thing, so you got to change your topic and you come back to it when the checkpoint comes up later. So you get that problem where things are organized badly to do things efficiently. And that's where custom sort orders come in. We created a logical sequence and continue to refine it, that we improve it for what gives the way we test our products and do them more efficiently in addition to WCAG. All of our assessments can be sorted in WCAG order, so we can do the reports that are appropriate that way, but we can also sort them into an order that makes sense for the kinds of products we test and the way that will make that efficient. So we prioritize that group order. And so that order I showed you, which starts with keyboard, those are the first things we test. We're testing the keyboard, navigation, the forms. These are things we know our users are going to do. And if you remember, the 11th item on there, time-based media, that's the last thing we test. That way, if people follow the test sort order, they're testing what matters most for our products, and they can give the quick initial results to somebody without having spent their time muddling around with things that aren't quite so important. And this is like time-based media. They also say it's the showstoppers. Some of the very first checkpoints we have are the ones that, if it doesn't work with a keyboard, if I don't see visible focus, if there is a keyboard trap, I probably can't actually test the site. It would be smart, and we think it's smart, to start with that right away. Those are some of the first checkpoints that we do. That way, if we can't continue, we don't spend our time looking at images like, yeah, we fixed all these images and we looked at these other parts, but the keyboard operations of the site is dead in the water. We want to prioritize checkpoints and things that are most important to accessibility first, so that we can get that information back to stakeholders and developers and designers to address it right away. And within those areas, we can organize it to be important. Our first checkpoints are about visible focus, primarily because most of our testers are sighted. And visible focus as a keyboard operation are what we typically do for testing. And we do that, we do keyboard operation, we do keyboard trap. we can get those in that order, prioritizing it the way we want. And then we can take those groups and put them in the order. So we do, within the groups, such as images. We'll test content images, images of text, which is a separate success criterion, and then you get complex images, then decorative images. We put them and we can tune them to be more efficient for when we're doing our testing. Now, one sidebar I should go into is that if you create your own sorting orders, unlike WCAG, if you're doing things in Excel or anything that's trying to do sorting, there's a lot of things you should know about how you encode your IDs. First of all, IDs are mandatory. If you're using a spreadsheet, if you allow people to sort or do any modifications of it, you should have the first column be some sort of truly unique identifier that allows people to do the sorting but get it back in the order that makes sense for WCAG. Or when they start talking about, instead of saying the third item, they can reference an explicit checkpoint number. Because if you don't do that, you say, well, what happens is they will change the sorting, and this happened early in our product, in our testing, is that we didn't have that. And people started doing the filters, and things got sorted slightly differently using the column headers, and suddenly they would talk about it based on the row number, but that row number was not the way it was doing the testing, and now you're spending your time trying to figure out exactly which checkpoint. They said it was the 7th checkpoint, but that 7th checkpoint doesn't sound like that. That sounds like the 9th checkpoint. That's a lot of wasted time. You want to make sure you've got unique identifiers, and you want to make sure that you don't have duplicates. A situation, if you did checkpoints only by the success criterion, that works to a point, but what happens is you get multiple checkpoints from that criteria. Like I said, we had 11 checkpoints for a time for 111 or 20, or still have about 14 of them for 131 info and relationships. If you don't have it so that those can be sorted in a proper order, they will get lost and confused also. So you want to make sure that you get unique identifiers, numbers or things assigned to each checkpoint. You will probably want to base them on WCAG or have some way to sort the checkpoints so that they will get rolled right back up into WCAG order, so you can do a report like VPATs, or that they are in a form that somebody who's familiar with WCAG but not your checklist will see things like, yeah, okay, 111, non-text content, got it. Okay, 121, audio and video, got it, and things like that. Now, having those sort orders is helpful, and the other part is starting with WCAG 2.1, you've got to account for the way WCAG is numbered. It's got it's like numbers have got number, point number, point number. And that was fine in WCAG 2.0, but in WCAG 2.1, they added many more success criteria under guideline 1.4, and they added 1.1, there's like 1.1.11, 1.1.12. If you try doing a sort in a lot of programs, that won't work correctly. You will get the order, instead of being 0.9, 0.10, 0.12, you'll get a WCAG order which shows on here 1.4.1, 1.4.10, 1.411, 1.412, 13, 1.42. You need to account for the leading zeros, and that's just so that when you do the sorting, things sort in the way that you would expect, so that they will go back and match WCAG. So we've got the checkpoints, we've got groupings, we now have the sorting order. Where else can you get improvements? And that gets us to something else that is easy to ignore, which is we wanted bespoke severity levels. We wanted to custom tailor the A and level AA things into something that would be more meaningful. Because, again, A, AA, AAA don't work that well for testing. They don't prioritize your checkpoints very well because it's like when you're doing WCAG AA conformance, there are only 2 levels, and and essentially that's one group. When you want conformance, you need to meet all the single A and AA. The levels are helpful to structure how you learn and relative importance, but testing, you need a finer grain because, again, AAA, you don't usually test that. I have asked, does anybody target level A conformance? And it's like, some do. There are, I was told there's in Ontario, there are some standards where they're doing just, the starting point is level A on your way to AA. But typically, the Section 508, the EN 301, 549, these all say you need to go for AA. So it's not, it's all one level, essentially. The single A, AA don't always mean that much. And that single A and AA are often too broad for processes when you're trying to prioritize your backlog, such as an Agile process. You usually have severity scales that have 4 levels. One that is used at UHG is Moscow, which is a kind of an acronym for must have, should have, could have, won't have. Now, we don't have a standard that says anything like that. WCAG does not have any won't have. If you don't have any won't have, that would probably be AAA. But the challenge is that if you go straight by single A and AA, which are the showstoppers? What are the major barriers versus minor barriers to use? And a great case in point for those is criterion 212, no keyboard trap, is level A. So is 411, parsing. These are both level A. One of them will keep everybody, using a keyboard from being able to use your site. The other may have an impact on their ability to use the site, but may be completely invisible to them because it really just means that the code wasn't structured properly. But it does still work with the screen reader. It still works with Dragon. It still works with the Braille system. It still works with the magnifier. It's really not as important as the fact that every keyboard user is locked up when things go wrong. So we created our own bespoke custom severity levels. And the levels are names that were pretty common. Ours were actually taken from some examples taken from Wells Fargo many years ago. And there are 4 of them. We've got critical. These are your showstoppers or blockers to site access. They keep people from doing any work. They may be anybody from, that's using a keyboard from getting the work, or they won't work for the screen reader at all. That they may also prevent you from doing testing. Again, if I'm trying to test a site and I can't use a keyboard, you probably want to send it back to them and say, wait a minute, you've got a lot of work to do here. This is where you need to focus. The second level will be high. These can be very challenging and impossible for most, but you get an expert screen reader user or somebody who is really determined to use your site. This one they might be able to overcome, but for the most part, most people will have a challenge. You want to prioritize these next, between the ones that stop things from happening to those that really keep most people from even bothering. They'll just give up on your site. Then you get to medium, which is might be frustrating or time-consuming, but it's more reasonable. It's going to have an impact, but it won't keep people from getting through in the normal case. And then low, this is the last of these. Might be significant impact for many, but probably will have, these are going to be known challenges, things that people may accept on the site. You create these custom levels, and that gives you several benefits. First of all, you can change you keep the reference to the single A and AA, but you add that. And one of the cases I already mentioned, we raised visible focus criterion 247 from AA to critical, which is taking it beyond single A. The part to keep in mind is that is something that even WCAG understands that they did wrong, because in the 2.2 drafts that they have, they're creating a 247 is actually going to get promoted to single A, and a new AA version at 2.411, which is going to be the enhanced version of visible focus as the proposal, will take its place, because visible focus really keeps sighted people, low vision people, from being able to use a site using a keyboard. So we, by having our own levels, could raise that to what we thought was appropriate, which would impact our ability to test. We could also get the aligned to the product and project needs by identifying what would be a minimum viable product or accessible product, or something that aligns with the majority of our projects, which are agile. How do we, if we can put up our issues and say it fails here, we can say these are the ones that are critical, put these and prioritize them, get them in the earlier sprints, groom them into the earlier project plan so that they get addressed. We did make sure that all of these are not like Moscow. There's not going to be a won't. They are saying it's like all of these need to be met, because we still are striving towards full WCAG 2.1 AA conformance. But if you've been on projects where people are told that, they usually push back. I've been on calls where it's like, oh, but that's not that important. No. Everything has to be done for conformance. Otherwise, it is not complete. And one other part about this is that you can align critical, high, medium, low against single A and AA. So maybe Single A is going to be your criticals and highs, and mediums and lows are going to be your double A, maybe your triple A. So customize the criteria into checkpoints. Customize the groups into, customize principles and guidelines into groups. Customize all, the sort order. Customize the severity level. That's a lot of customization. There's still more that you can do. Just like getting a fine suit, what do you want for your accessories? There's still more custom tailoring, more bespoke details that you can do in your reports that can give you value and could be important to your stakeholders. For example, you've got checklists. As I mentioned, we added 15 checkpoints for 2.1 WCAG. We can have a column in our spreadsheet that says this is WCAG 2.0, this came in 2.1, and then we can filter on that. We can filter a report. We do a test for WCAG 2.1, but it only needs to do WCAG 2.0. We need that for a VPAT. We can filter out the WCAG 2.1 checkpoints. Maybe we've done an assessment that was WCAG 2.0 and everything was great, but when we want to test only the 2.1 checkpoints, filter out the 2.0, test those checkpoints, give them a supplemental report. Or you just set it as a default. You test everything all the time. But you can do it from what you do for testing, perhaps, or what you do in your reports. Same thing can happen to level A. You have a column and you put the single A, double A, triple A, and you mark it so I want to do single A only. I'm going to do double A only. I want to ignore any triple A checkpoints you might have. That you can set the filters to do that. One of the places this filter can be helpful is that you do your assessment, you test it in your test sort order, but now you want to do a report for VPAT. If you've seen the current versions of VPAT, they have a situation where you write up all the success criteria results for the single A, and then you do the double A, because they're not in WCAG order either. But if I have a filter that says these are the checkpoints that I put in WCAG order, and I look at the single A ones, I can merge the ones for 111 and then 121 and 122 by setting and focusing and putting in an order that matches what I have to fill out in my report. And then when I get to double A, change the filter, put it to double A, not single A, and I can finish this off more smoothly than I might do if I had to jump from, okay, that was the end of single A, got to get to the next guideline and get the next checkpoint that is that way. More WCAG you can carry forward are the POUR principles. We had the stakeholder who bankrolled the growth of our department, who thought from his previous experience that it would be useful to have the checkpoint counts done by principal. So we created a POUR report. It had 4 bar charts, 4 bars, one for perceivable, one for operable, one for understandable, one for robust. And we added a column with the POUR on it, and that allowed us to create a bar chart that met that need because it was important to a critical stakeholder. And I had to update about 3 dozen reports when that request came down because it was a retrofit, and it was awkward, but it was doable, and we could use that going forward. You could also do it for guidelines. If you had a stakeholder or had someone who was very interested based on your guidelines, add a column, put the 1.1, 1.2 for your different guidelines, and you can filter it up like that. So you can pull forward a lot of the WCAG to meet the needs that you might have with your stakeholders and clients. Another part of it is that one of the challenges we face is our team got diversified, is that we started getting the customized checkpoints that allowed us to organize them by skill set. We were trying to deal with a case where we have screen reader experts and we pair them with visual testers to figure out which checkpoints can maximize what the tester can do, but make it for efficient so that we can have that visual assistant that works with them, supplement what they cannot do as effectively. So we have in our checklist a grouping where we have 2 roles: screen reader tester, or SRT, which is your assistive technology expert who's going to test primarily with 1 or more screen readers. That person gets paired with a visual assistant, or VA, who is who's going to rely primarily on vision and not assistive technology. In that column, we have 4 settings, and this allows us to do filtering and consistent work assignments of our checkpoints that everyone can use. So that you can, if I'm a VA with 1 person, an SRT with someone else, and a VA with a 3rd person, over time, we have a clear way to divide up the work because we have 4 types of settings in that column. SRT is when the screen reader tester is preferred. That means this case where this checkpoint is one that the screen reader tester is going to will encounter on their own anyway. Great example would be page title. Every time a page loads, a screen reader is going to announce the name of the page, and that means that probably more obvious to the screen reader user than the sighted user, they're going to keep hearing the page title. They might as well test that checkpoint because it's going to be front and center in the audio announcements from the screen reader. Second setting is either. It's a case where it's probably about equal between the screen reader tester and the visual assistant to do it easily well. Those tend to relate to content topics. To say, oh, yes, did that make sense? You know, as long as it's not purely something about the sensory characteristics, which is a special case. You know, are there headings? Do they make sense? Are they nested properly? That might be something you can share between or allocate to both. Either can do it. A more important one is the dual settings, and that's when you need both testers to do it because the screen reader experience is going to be very distinct from the visual experience. A really good case in point for this is forms and error handling. You do client-side validation. Does it update? Does the screen reader get told what's going on? Does the focus get set? Are the labels associated? You've got the questions under guideline 3.3 is like, is there a label? And then you've got 1.3.1 saying, is it programmatically associated? These are cases where you probably need both to test it because there's so much that can go wrong. To get it properly and thoroughly tested, you need both. Then the last one is VA for visual assistant preferreds. And again, we don't say that a screen reader person with severe visual deficits cannot do this work. We're just saying that it might be more effective and reliable for them to test a visual assistant to do the something like contrast testing because the screen reader tools can say there's poor contrast on something simple like a solid background, but hey, you know what? They put that text over an image and it's not a solid color. And did it or did it not pass? And do you need to use a color contrast analyzer to get exactly the right pixels picked out? That's another way we customize the checklist. And there's still more. We've been talking primarily about WCAG and WCAG reports. What happens if you are dealing with non-WCAG standards? Case in point, imagine it's the year 2020 and you still have to be presenting things in the original Section 508 standard from 1998, pre-refresh, not WCAG 2.0. And it has subpart 21 with software applications and operating systems with its 12 criteria, A through L, and subpart 22, web-based intranet and internet information and applications with its criteria names A through P. And then subpart 24, video and multimedia products, which have 5 criteria. I've already had to do that again this year because we had some states whose standard hasn't updated to Section 508 refresh. It's still stuck in the 90s, and that's what you need to do to get it through the procurement process. So what we do is that we have a column which does the mapping of the checkpoints and harmonizes WCAG 2.1 and 2.0 to old Section 508. And you may have some other older standards that are not primarily WCAG based, and you will be good. Having that allows you to meet that because we were getting ready to strike those out because, that wouldn't happen. And then I had to do a few this year. Also, not only do you look at the past, but again, from a risk perspective, what's going to happen in the future? You build a system that's based on checkpoints that are WCAG 2 based. We don't quite know what WCAG 3.0 is going to look like. You may need to have something that will help us to transition to that smoothly. And so being able to have the ability to plan and track a transition plan to move to other criteria or another standard could be appropriate. So we keep our checkpoints, but we now organize them under a future standard. So just to finish up, because we are running out of time, it's like some other things you can add to a checklist is that we had some say, describe what the checkpoints, who does it benefit? All of our checkpoints says like this affects users or this benefits users who have blind, low vision, deaf, cognitively impaired. what we have a standard set of tools. We might want to say, it's like when you want to test this, use these tools because we've got a list of tools. We support them. You can get them from our app store. We've got training materials that they can use to use them, and we carry it forward. We also, as I said, I do role-based analysis, and we can start saying, it's like, hey, this checkpoint failed. Yeah, it's about color contrast. Don't go to the developer. Go to the visual designer. This is about the way the text was written. How about we assign that to your content author role? So we have that. These are the sorts of things that you can add. So to summarize, all of this, which is pretty complete, is that you can and must support WCAG. You want to still have the ability in your checklist to do the criteria, guidelines, principles, conformance levels, and report it out to something like a VPAT. But how you get there is up to you, and you can tailor that to your needs. So as I've mentioned already, custom tailor WCAG so that you, with a bespoke checklist, that you can take your criteria, turn them into checkpoints, create as many as are appropriate for the criteria and your needs, get them so that they are based on WCAG where possible, using the understanding documents, leveraging what's in them, like the situations, the best practices. Take your guidelines and principles, create your own groupings that make sense for your target audiences. Don't look the numbers out of the box. Look at experiment with sort orders that allow you to encode them in ways that will be efficient for your processes and your reporting. Don't just take single A, double A out of the box. Create your own severity levels so that you can find the things that are really critical from those that might be critical, and add what else you need to make sure that you got the coverage you need for your products. And with that, as we're getting over time, thank you.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Bill. That was a wonderful presentation, chock full of information, and I'm sure useful to a lot of our attendees. Are there any questions that anyone would like to ask of Bill?
Yes, you can either type them in the chat window for Zoom, or I think you can unmute and ask them orally. And since I did cover a lot, I'll scroll all the way back to the start. If you didn't get the slide deck, initially, the bit.ly slide share URL is right up here. Yeah. bit.ly/3 lower h upper G lower O capital U capital B capital G. No questions?
Bill, this is Lynn. I've actually been dying to ask this of you. I think that most of us are feel like WCAG is so written in stone that if we mess with it in any way, we're breaking some sort of universal accessibility law. So whose idea was it that, maybe we need to regroup this and, perhaps manipulate this so that we can get at it better? It was your idea. Okay.
Yeah, it's the part of the, well, one part of the history of this checklist is that 1.0 checklist was actually done by QA testers. And it was initially designed to be, it actually integrated the original Section 508 in it, trying to automate that. But the part is that one of the things that I have been presenting in all sorts of different ways is this presentation really came from a presentation I did to a design group at 3M last year. And they seem to be very caught up on using, like you were saying, WCAG is this big standard. I can't break the rules. It's like, as long as you can present things the way WCAG does, you can get it in the forms that communicate it, that's, you'll be fine. You can't let it intimidate you by saying, oh, you have to do it exactly WCAG order. We have to do it in WCAG style. It doesn't work very well. As I said, when you're faced with trying to get a dozen or more people to test hundreds of products, you are looking for efficiencies, and that's where having a tool that you can tailor to your needs, you get there. And part of the analysis that I have done in the past, was looking at the success criteria, and I have done many parts of it about the numbering scheme and the parts of WCAG success criteria. These are problems which I hope to be part of the AG team. Our company now has W3C membership, and I'm hoping to get on there to bring some of my pet peeves that I found when I was learning WCAG and get sure that they're addressed, because they've got crazy ideas that they won't do any numbers. I'm trying to figure out how that would work for anything. WCAG order is not ideal for testing, but at least it's the way you do reporting. And you get that. I'm just trying to figure out, like, yeah, they have a bunch of checkpoints or success criteria based on something, but what's the order? Which way are you going to do it? It's going to be pretty darn random unless they put some sort of ordering on them. It's just understanding that, WCAG is great for learning. It's for structuring. It makes sure that accessibility is covered completely. But how you test it can be variable, and if you approach it intelligently, you just make sure that you can put it in WCAG order. You can have the guidelines, the principles, the criteria numbers, the A and AA levels. You make sure you have that in there, but you get a means that allows you to do it other ways. And a spreadsheet, that's one of its reasons, it's a raison d'etre. It's why you use a spreadsheet. You've got different ways of doing it. I can sort it for test sort order. I can group it by my groups, but then I can go back, do it by principles. It's just making sure that you build in both. You are, in a different sense, inclusive. I'm including WCAG in the way I'm doing things, as well as what I need for my stakeholders and what I need for my testers and other roles.
It's a really good point. Thanks.
Other questions?
Hey, Bill, this is Melissa Westfall here. I had a quick question.
Sure.
So I work at a small digital marketing agency, and I've kind of taken it on myself to like spearhead an accessibility initiative at my work. And I guess I'm wondering, like, so this is all very helpful and informative, but I'm wondering, like, what would be a good first step at a much smaller scale? Because we're probably less than 50 people at the whole agency. So like I've done mostly like research as far as like what accessibility is and, best practices, but I'm stuck at a point where it's like, okay, well, what next? How do I get to the next step? So do you have any recommendations on how to get to the next hurdle, like over the next hurdle?
Well, that's a bigger question. The part is, it's like, I need to know, it's really about knowing where you currently are and how, and what your options are.
Sure.
I mean, the case, it's like, one of the things that in our history is that we could not predict. I mean, being there at the very genesis, at the beginning, like being employee one for the accessibility practice, that's now up to about 45 people, I would never have known, or could never have guessed it went this way. In your situation, as a small group in a small organization, the part is like it may, depending on what your actual needs are, it's like how you're approaching accessibility. I think it's a matter of planning of how, it's like having somebody who's going to own it. I think it's strategic. I think you've got to step back and, trying to figure out what is accessibility going to mean to your practice, and how are you going to go about it? It's like one of the things we do in our department is we've got, we do our Grow Your Own program. We've got people who are doing UX, but, we have more work for accessibility. One or two may go through our internal program to become accessibility engineers to learn these sorts of things. In your situation, the question is, can you find somebody who wants to join your practice who already knows accessibility, or are you, like what it sounds like, are you going to be that? Are you going to take on that role? And another part of it is that going to be your full-time role, or is it going to be a part-time role? So part of it is just making sure you have a sense of what accessibility is going to mean in a company or a group like yours, because after that, the approach gets into a question of budget. I mean, can you work with a company, top drawer companies, DQ, Level Access, TPG, or smaller groups? You can work with WCAG. They're local. They can help you. I mean, it's a matter of, what you have budget for, what you need for your projects. And it's like, if you're a consulting firm, it's like, what are the needs of your clients and how are you going to meet them? And once you know how you're going to do your business, then how you do accessibility probably will flow from that, because that's the problem I have with your question. It's like, it's not really what I've been presenting here. It's just when it's like, if you're going to do it and do it yourself, this is what you do. I think it's, to me, without knowing more about where you are and what you're doing, I don't know quite how to give you a solid answer other than there needs to be something of a strategic plan for your organization to say how you're going to meet, because if you're a consulting firm, how are you going to market your accessibility? What is it you're going to claim you can do if you haven't done it? How are you going to get the skills in your team? Are you going to hire them? Are you going to farm them out? Are you going to grow them? And then start working towards that. Once you've got those decisions, then, then depending on what you do, you've got sources. You can go to WCAG. You could go to somewhere else. You can hire immediately start hiring somebody, and then that person takes it on. That's kind of what I would see, depending on, how your commitment or your approach would be.
All right. Well,
Is that helping to answer your question?
Yeah, no, that does help. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm. I see a few thank yous. I'm glad that people have enjoyed the presentation. It's like, again, other questions, can be, about the presentation or other topics. If it stays quiet, I guess Lynn can go to the wrap up.
Well, and I think we'll let Andy wrap up, but I do want to thank you, Bill, and thank everybody for being here.
Excellent. Well, the last slide that we have in our deck is just another thank you to our sponsors. United Health Group, WCAG, both were mentioned today. Special thank you goes out to Bill Tyler again for such an informative presentation. Tons and tons of information there. We'll make sure that this is uploaded to the meetup group probably by tomorrow, midday. So we'll have that up there. We'll have all the captioning. If you want to take a look back and learn anything, I'll also make sure to include that bit.ly link to Bill's slides, so you can reference that at any point in time. Again, if you have any questions at any point in time, feel free to reach out to me on Meetup or by my email, which I've included in the chat as well.
I want to add one more thing. If you go to the Meetup entry for this meeting, I put that out there. Unfortunately, Meetup would not allow me to paste a live link. You'll have to, it has all the upper, lower kinds of things in there, but it's there in case, you will say, well, if you go to the page where you got the, the URL or the information to get to this session, you should see it in the comments after.
Awesome. Thank you, Bill. Well, thanks again to everybody for attending this evening's meetup. We look forward to seeing you in July, as well as then on to September and November. Thanks again, and hope to see you again soon. Bye-bye.